everybody who was, well, not seen as in the hip pocket of the corporations themselves.
I will tear down these walls. Do you hear me, Carnegie? Do you hear me, Rockefeller?
Bryan's emergence is the biggest threat the Titans have ever faced. He promises to dismantle their companies and to not rest until they're behind bars.
This is William Jennings Bryan at a recent Democrat rally. He's a prohibitionist and a devout Presbyterian. According to him, Darwin's theory of evolution is a pack of lies. He's an enemy of the gold standard and an enemy of big business. It is certain that he will win the Democratic nomination. What do you think?
The Republican Party has a good candidate.
No. We have to buy our own president.
They took advantage of the strengths. When you have, what relatively speaking is an unlimited amount of money, you can pay people to do almost anything for you.
Desperate to protect the empires they've spent their lifetimes building, the Titans throw their full support behind the candidacy of Ohio Governor William McKinley.
William McKinley's campaign manager was an industrialist himself, and he went essentially hat in hand around Wall Street, dunning them, saying, if McKinley doesn't win, that crazy man Bryan will be president. And if Bryan is president, don't you realize what that is going to do to the credibility of the United States around the world?
The Titans wield more power than any group of men in American history. And they're about to use it.
Much appreciated. This is McKinley's speech that he'll be giving at the Republican convention. Make sure he sees it in time. Understood.
Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie each give over $200,000 to McKinley, the equivalent of $20 million today. The campaign is by far the most expensive in American history, and McKinley outspends Bryan by a factor of 5 to 1. But they don't just fund their candidate. The group wields tremendous influence, and they aren't shy about using it. Suggesting headlines and orchestrating PR campaigns aimed at getting McKinley elected.
It was easier to buy the publicity that you wanted in those days than it is now. The news media was a smaller market, and it was easier to feed information to your favorite correspondents then than it probably is now.
Bryan fights back. He undertakes the country's first whistle-stop press tour, crisscrossing the nation and speaking directly to the people. The tour becomes the model for the way presidential campaigns are conducted to this day. Bryan gives over 500 speeches to huge crowds across the country.
I will put rings in the noses of these hogs.
Publicly attacking the nation's richest and most powerful men, and vowing to usher in a whole new era. As Bryan's campaign gains traction, the nation's leading industrialists turn to fear tactics.
Many big employers, many big industrialists said, if Bryan wins the election, business is going to be so bad, we're simply closing shop. So if Bryan wins on election Tuesday, don't bother showing up for work on the next day because there won't be jobs. Well, if you're a worker and this is something that confronts you, you're going to think very seriously, even if you had been intending to vote for Bryan. Which way does maybe your heart leans toward Bryan, but where does your pocketbook point?
On Election Day, the lines are drawn. It's Wall Street versus Main Street, rich versus poor.
One of the things of an evolving society is the wealth distribution. And it's clear that what we argue about today, that's the core of every politics, is it better with wealth in the hands of a few versus distributing among the many, whether from a moral or an economic point of view.
90% of eligible voters go to the polls, roughly double recent turnouts.
In the 1890s, voting was a public act. And on one side, there was the Republican ballot box, and the other side was the Democratic ballot box. And so your foreman, or an agent of your foreman, could see who you voted for. So there was a certain coercion that was employed by the Republicans upon those urban workers. They might well have decided what they decided on their own, but this simply made it easier for them to decide that.
When the polls close, the nation's future hangs in the balance. For 20 long hours, Carnegie, Morgan, and Rockefeller agonize over the results, not knowing whether the modern country they helped build will still be the same when all the ballots are counted. America is at a crossroads. A small group of men have created the modern country, building unimagined empires in oil, steel, and electricity. But now, those empires are being threatened. People across the country are demanding change, outraged over what they see as corrupt business practices and unbearable conditions for workers. The 1896 U.S. presidential election is the battleground to determine the future of the nation. And the Titans have done everything they can to make sure the election goes their way. As America goes to the polls, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and John Rockefeller are forced to wait. Ultimately, this decision lies in the hands of the American people. The country is divided. Democrat William Jennings Bryan carries the rural South and Midwest, while Ohio Governor William McKinley takes the big money Northeast. As the results are tallied, the nation holds its breath. Until finally, a president is chosen. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan have dodged a bullet. The country remains in their control. With McKinley in office, they're free to conduct business in the way they've become accustomed.
After McKinley's election, a number of the issues that had bothered the big businessmen conveniently went away. He was a man who was, in his philosophy, in his approach to politics, very much in sympathy with them.
McKinley rolls back regulations, and profits once again skyrocket. It's back to business as usual. And Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan are set to become even more powerful than ever before.